Hello everyone and welcome to another IP webinar. I'm glad you could join us today. Today's webinar is titled Collaborative Problem Solving with English Language Learners. Today we're going to take a look at what collaborative problem solving looks like with our English language learners. We'll discuss why it's important, and then we'll look at how we can implement these strategies into our classroom settings. Our goal is to prepare our students for their careers and meet the demands of the current workforce. Part of our job becomes giving them practice in these collaborative career settings. To facilitate today's webinar, we brought back Jenna Moniz, who has done a lot of research in collaborative problem solving strategies. She has implemented these practices in her classroom and has seen firsthand the positive impact it has had on her students. Thank you, Jenna, for letting us tag along with you today as we discuss this important topic. But before we get started, I wanted to remind you of a few things. First off, we want to hear from you. Ask your questions and tell us what you think. We will monitor your interactions throughout the webinar and address them as they come up. Do this by using the Q&A tab that you see on your screen. Remember that your attendee microphones are muted, so you must use your Q&A tab for discussion. Today's webinar is being recorded and it will be available within 48 hours on the IP website. If you haven't already downloaded the PowerPoint and the workbook, keep in mind that they're already loaded on the IP website. You can find it under the content area of ESOL and then simply tab to the webinar section. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jenna and we'll start the webinar. Thank you.
And thank you, June. I certainly appreciate the warm welcome. It's so great to be here with you all. It's hard to believe we are approaching the end of May. It's a fun and exciting time of year, certainly for us and those of you out there who are maybe prepping for graduation ceremonies and have students working toward their goals and potentially working toward their post-secondary entrance and goals. So lots going on. It's a busy time of year for us. We know it's busy for you as well. So thank you for carving out the time to be here with us today. As June mentioned, we're going to talk today about how we can best prepare our students, especially and including our English learners, for the career setting, for the workforce, for the 21st century skills that we know that they're going to need once they leave our classrooms and transition into the workforce. So what you see here is, a slide that we often share with regard to our frameworks, our adult frameworks. I'm sure you know where to find these, but if you don't, they are on the DOE website. And I know that I share this slide just about every webinar that we do, but it's so important to me and to us because it's important that we know that these are our roadmaps. This is our curriculum. This is what we follow. These are our standards. It's easy, I think, for us, admittedly, to get into a habit of using our publishers' work, using textbooks and using our technology and using tools and resources to guide us. But it's important also that we remember that these standards, the frameworks, are our guide, and the resources, the technology, the books, etc., are here to support and supplement what our roadmaps show us. And we know that our adult standards and frameworks are under the process of being state board approved, and we thank our DOE for all of their hard work to get those ready and ready for the next school year. So as June mentioned, we're going to talk about that collaborative problem solving, how we can get a high rigorous instruction and preparation for the workforce into all levels of our classrooms, from our beginning and literacy level ESOL classes through our GED AAAE classes. As an educator in South Florida, many of my students, well over half, of my students, 50% of my students, if not more, are English learners, no matter where they land in terms of adult ed. So when we talk about reaching out and providing strategies for English learners, we're not just talking about in our ESOL classes, we're talking about across the board in our GED classrooms, AAAE classrooms, and our CTE classrooms as well. So we're talking really across the board and how we can reach English learners and students of all levels and language backgrounds and get them ready for the career force. Why does this matter? Why is it important that we talk about getting students ready for the workforce and starting inside of the classrooms and starting with strategies even at the literacy levels of ESOL? Well, we know that the workforce is demanding these types of employees that are ready with these skills. And I'll just be silent for a moment and let you take a look at this quotation here from the Association for Psychological Science. So not to be redundant or to overstate what this scholarly article shares with us, but basically what the workforce is screaming at us in education is that employees that they are getting are not equipped with the kinds of skills that they need them to be equipped with, namely working together, working on teams to figure things out, being able to communicate effectively among peers, being able to sit down and problem solve together and think of creative solutions to real world problems that we're facing today and even the problems that we don't know are on the horizon. Do students, do their employees have the type of cognitive skills and preparation to figure out and innovate new solutions to problems that we may or may not even know that we will be facing? And if not, how do we prepare them with those skills? So really we're talking today about really elevating what we do in adult general education from ESOL through GED, elevating what we do from a place of moving students through the CASAS exam and the TABE exams and the GED exams, whatever the exams are. We know that passing the exams are not enough. So for example, with the GED, passing the GED tests with a 145, which means that I passed or progressing and meeting your basic skills exit scores if you're looking at the CTE side, we know that just passing a test doesn't necessarily mean that they are equipped with the kinds of skills and cognitive and creative thinking, critical thinking skills that they're going to need to be problem solvers in the workforce. So it's not just coming from the education field, it's actually coming down from the workforce saying, folks, we need you to prep these employees that you're sending us with not just the academics, but also with the real world 21st century types of critical thinking skills to be able to meet the demand of the 21st century workforce. And what this scholarly article says, and I put the link in the slide, so please do, if you haven't taken a look at it, read this article. It's very sobering. What the article says is that we pretty much are at ground zero in the education field with developing these skills. So just an example of one of the things that we tried to do recently at our school is to take, for example, a topic, and we took the topic of mental health awareness because May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we took the topic that is very relevant to to everyone, and we took this theme through our ESOL classes all the way through our GED classes. So it was all of our AGE programs, our pre-college programs that took on this topic. And actually our ESOL classes were the ones who came up with the idea, why don't we tackle this topic of mental health awareness since this is May and Mental Health Awareness Month. Let's take on this topic that we know touches so many of us, whether it be us or whether it be folks that we know, family members that may not even necessarily be labeled with a diagnosis, but just facing the levels of stress that, it's hard not to deal with stress nowadays. And being that it was May and Mental Health Awareness Month, we took this on because we know that this is a topic that affects us all. And we wanted to have some real honest conversation around mental health awareness and to remove some of the stigma around talking about mental health awareness and talking about stress and anxiety and depression, and remove some of those layers and barriers and of stigma. And we know that there are some cultural implications here too, because many of our students, at least in South Florida, when we start talking about mental health awareness, sometimes you can slide into a place of, it can be somewhat of a taboo conversation. So in part, we wanted to remove some of the barriers, get it out in the open, talk about something that we know affects us all, but also make it a topic that we could center our learning around. So we took the topic of mental health awareness and said, how can we integrate the 4 C's? And when we talk about the 4 C's, we're talking about 21st century learning skills. So the skills that we just discussed, the skills of working together, collaboration, effective communication, critical thinking, thinking things through, figuring things out together, and then being creative, coming up with solutions together. So how could we take this topic of mental health awareness and apply the 4 C's of 21st century learning to the topic? And so we took a look at where we were with our ESOL curriculum frameworks. And those of you who are deeply entrenched in the frameworks and working through this are aware of the crosswalk and the correlation of the college and career readiness standards and the English Language Proficiency Standards for adult ed. So you see there's just so much overlap, with regard to listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and the college and career readiness standards. So there were a lot of inroads for us, a lot of places where we knew that we were hitting both objectives. We're hitting all standards in one. So let's dig into that a little bit deeper. So just to reiterate, the 4 C's, right? Collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, the 4 C's of 21st century skills model are included in the top 5 workplace skills that will be sought most by employers in 2020. So we shared this during our last webinar that I did with my colleague who I'll share some of her work with you in a bit. But it's important to realize that these 4 C's, 21st century learning skills that we are talking about, are on the top of the list of what employers are asking for. So it's just another way to look at the same kind of feedback that we were getting through that scholarly article. So here we show you again, and those of you who sat in our last webinar remember seeing this slide that I did with my colleague. So it just shows you the comparison of the workplace skills of 2015 and 2020. And you take a look at those 4 C's jumping out at you in the list of the most critically needed skills for 2020. This is a lesson plan template, and we're going to share this lesson plan template with you. But we thought about how can we pull together all of our criteria for English language learners, making sure that we're hitting both the CCR standards and what's important for language proficiency and language sharing. And here is a lesson plan template that we'd be happy to share with you that we know kind of ties everything together. So we're talking about 21st century themes, 21st century skills that we mentioned, our CCR standards, and interdisciplinary connections. So this could very well go through your ESOL through your GED classes. So I could be a teacher in a GED class teaching all 4 GED subjects, and this is a lesson plan that I can, template that I can use to show how I am meeting the needs of not only my students, but also integrating the topics, integrating the subjects, because we know that a lot of the standards that you will find in reasoning through language arts, you're also going to find in social studies, you'll also find in science, as well as reasoning through mathematics or mathematical reasoning. So this is a nice way to kind of pull it all together, to synthesize it, and really just be aware of what we're doing in terms of our lesson planning and making sure that we are not only hitting the standards, but leaving room for all of the needs of our English learners at all levels. So how can we integrate listening, speaking, reading, and writing, no matter what class you're in, an ESOL class or GED science class for that matter? Hitting our technology and the equipment that we might need, and just to point out the box on differentiation. So, also important for us to keep in mind as we're planning our lessons, how are we meeting the diverse variety of needs that we have for our learners? Our learners are all very different. They show up very, very different, even if we're talking about the same level, and when I say level, I'm, you know, as measured by either CASAS or TABE or your GED, even if you have a similar level, quote unquote, level class, you're still going to have a diverse need within your students. So, you know, your students show up very, very differently. We all have different preferences when it comes to, you know, how we like to learn and receive information and process information, and then show that we've got mastery of information, so output. And looking outside of the boxes of that standardized assessment, how are ways that what are some ways that we can show that students have mastered a skill, mastered a standard, and even gone beyond to, you know, to get into the levels of not just mastery, but even beyond where we're talking about creativity and creating, when we're talking about really those upper levels of Webb's depth of knowledge. How are we getting to that place that the workforce is telling us they need their employees to be prepared for? How are we making them problem solvers? How are we making them critical thinkers and innovators to problems that we know that we're going to be facing? And by thinking of differentiation, we're also meeting students where they are. So are we thinking about students' readiness, their background knowledge? So if we're talking about mental awareness as a topic, your students are going to come into the topic with different levels of awareness, different levels of interest, different biases. Are we taking those all into account as we, you know, navigate through instruction? Language proficiency, their lexile levels, and of course their learning styles. Last conversation we had, we dug into the multiple intelligences, so we invite you, if you haven't, if you're not aware of what multiple intelligences are, Howard Gardner from Harvard University did lots of research on his theory of what the 8 or 9 multiple intelligences are of human beings. And so are we taking those into account when we are asking students to receive information and then share information out? And then one of my most favorite on the bottom of the template is, how are we connecting what we are learning to the real world? This is where your application really comes in. And I think if we start with that question, how is what we are learning in class connected to the real world issues, and how are we preparing students to apply this knowledge in the real world, it really keeps us on track. So back to our topic of mental health awareness. We started off with asking students to do some of the research, to look into what the topic is about, how it relates to their lives, how it relates to their communities, how it relates to students around us, and doing some of the research behind what are some of the most prevalent mental health issues that we're facing. So we asked students to do some research. It's easy, you know, I think, for us to get into a habit of when students are using computers to get onto the programs that publishers provide for us, but it's important that we also give them opportunities to use the internet to do things like research, and even for computer literacy and communication, you know, showing students how to write and draft well-written emails and appropriately written emails. So we took this opportunity to get students online and to do some research, and research scholarly articles, not just through Google. And I know we don't share publisher information often, but this happens to be one program that is on some levels free. So there's a free level of Newsella, and I know a lot of folks use this out there. I'm a huge proponent for a lot of reasons. With this shift in the CCR standards to reading and getting familiar much more with informational texts versus literary texts, this is a great resource in that it shares current events, real news, informational text that literally you can go onto Newsella, and if there was big news from yesterday, you will see an article about it showing up today. So these are current events. They tend to be high interest, and one of the beautiful things about this program is that it will differentiate the lexile levels for you, so we don't even have to do that. It allows us in a mixed level classroom to read the same article. We're reading about the same topic, and it will differentiate the lexile levels for your students. So for example, you can be reading the same article about Let's take the texting can be positive and a powerful force, experts say. You can read that same article in a class, and one student can have an easier level of the text than another student. They don't even have to know that they have different versions of the text because you're all reading and talking about the same conversation.
Jenna, before you go on,
Yes,
check
ma'am.
the Q&A. You have a question in there.
Thank you. Let's see. Oh, that's a great question. So I have a question in the Q&A with regard to, and I'm going to flip back if that's okay, just really quickly, just to make sure that I am being clear on this lesson plan template. So the question in my Q&A is, in the portion, in the box of differentiation, under learning styles. So I explained a little bit about multiple intelligences. I didn't talk much about VAK. I made the assumption that VAK, and I should have spelled that out, but VAK is an acronym for visual, auditory, kinesthetic. So we're talking about information coming in. It comes in either visually, auditorily, or kinesthetically, and that's coming in and coming out. So input and output. These are our channels, for lack of better words, for information coming in. Some of us tend to be extremely visual. Others tend to be much more auditory, and others tend to be kinesthetic learners, you know, learning by doing, experiential learning. And the truth of the matter is we all are all of these, you know, unless there is a level of unless there's a disability, but we'll tend to have preferences. Some of us will learn better by reading something. Some of us learn better by doing it. Some of us learn better by hearing. So that's what the VAK stands for, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic. And it's really important to keep in mind because, bottom line, the more opportunities we offer of all three, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, the better the student will understand the information. The better the student will not only retain the information, but able to fire it more quickly, so remember it more quickly the next time and transfer it into other categories. So visual, auditory, kinesthetic, it's important to keep that in mind. The more opportunities to do more of them, the better information sticks. So I'll go back to our conversation here about differentiating for reading readiness. As I said, this program does it automatically for you, so you don't have to think through, you know, offering different text. As you see on the left-hand side of the screen, you can take that same article and break it down into different lexile levels. And you see the high interest here. So with English language learners, you know, we want to provide the kinds of scaffolds that will get them more comfortable communicating and starting the conversation. And it's okay to offer, you know, signal words and transition words. They'll need these both in speaking and in writing. So we're talking about output with speaking and writing. So by offering, and this template, this resource is being provided to you. It should already be uploaded in IPDAY, but there's some great word frames and transitions and sentence starters here. And also you'll see here that these signal words here will help us to recognize the kinds of critical thinking that we're doing. So for example, if I use the word because, that's going to be my trigger. That's going to be my key word to let me know, oh, we're talking about either a cause and effect situation or a problem solution situation. So these are key words to give to students so they're aware that when they hear these signal words, this is the kind of critical thinking that we're engaging in. And then, of course, providing lots of opportunity for communication and listening and speaking. So we did the research on the different kinds of mental health issues and topics and disorders that are most prevalent. And we had students, you know, talk about it. They converse. And, you know, in this kind of setting, there are lots of strategies that you can use to make it easy for students to really glean the information, you know, chunking. This looks like this could, you know, even be a jigsaw type of activity where you take one article and students chunk it, break it up, and become like the experts of certain parts of it, and then sharing it out at the end of the conversation. They've all, taken in the information. Now they're all experts because they've, for lack of better words, have all read the article. They've gotten the information on the entire article. But it gets students talking and collaborating. I love the setting here. I love that students are in a circle as opposed to rows. It looks communal. It looks like they're a team. It looks like they're a group. I can't even tell if the teacher is there. So it's a great, way to get students talking about, important topics. And again, with your English learners who need a scaffold in terms of getting that conversation going and starting, it's okay to provide sentence frames for them. So, we can give them like the starters. I anticipate that something is going to cause something else. And if they have that practice before they even dive into that conversation piece, then they're a little bit better prepared and more comfortable with the language before they jump in. So these are ways that we can really even get our beginning English learners engaged in high-level, rigorous conversation. Okay, and here are more examples here. And again, you're seeing the different kinds of critical thinking, cause and effect here that we're allowing students to get engaged in, even if we're giving them a little bit of support of a scaffold. So back to our research with regard to mental health awareness. This was done in our science class. So the science teacher, Regina Turner, who was our guest facilitator last webinar, took this topic on, and she and her students, after having done some of the research, began to poll. So again, now we're getting our students engaged with other classes and other settings, and what they did was kind of take a poll within their classroom and then outside of their classroom of these mental health disorders that they just read about to find out whether or not students that they know were affected by them. So you kind of see the totals here in different classrooms, but it's surveying whether or not students had been affected, if they know someone, if either themselves or they know someone who was affected by each of these disorders. And it's pretty powerful because there are very few boxes here that go untouched. So we see it's, another indicator, another reminder that it's so important to talk about issues that are important to students, and clearly mental health awareness is a topic that affects many of our students. And the fact that we put it out there in the open and made students more comfortable with it, and students were able to look around and say, hey, I'm not the only one who knows someone, or I'm not the only one who deals with this, really helped to remove some of the stigma behind it. So it was a really good entrance into, really getting open about the conversation. And then, when we talk about our interdisciplinary approaches, so we just talked about ways that students can read really rigorous topics, really important topics, and how we can bring it to each of their levels so that everyone is able to glean the information. We talked about the conversation behind it and making sure that students know what they've read and have shored up about it. Then we talked about digging in and polling students and, well, how does this affect you? Do you know someone who? And then, so now we're talking about, pulling in the reading. Obviously, the mental health awareness is a scientific topic. It's a topic that's related to people, so we're talking about civics. And then when they start charting it out and graphing it out, now we're adding the layers of charts and graphs that you will see show up not only on the math portion of GED, but you will see on the CASAS exams, you will see on the science portions of GED, you'll see across the board. These are one of the charts and graphs, and understanding how to read charts and graphs is a skill that students need to have no matter what area or no matter what level they're at. So allowing them to dig into this with a topic that's as important to them was really cool to see how they not only bar graphed it and pie graphed it, they were able to then take it and plot it out onto graphs. So we're talking about dependent and independent variables, which translates into X and Y on the when we graph it out. And, you know, this is me trying to talk as best as I can from the perspective of my science and math experts. I was in there as on the part of a learner. So, you know, I happen to learn a lot just being around students, which is really cool for, you know, them to know that they're teaching the staff. I learned a lot from students.
And Jenna?
Yeah.
You know, just the work that they're doing themselves, that the students are doing that, you're getting some comments back on that's really great that they're actually doing that poster work themselves. And then you have another comment about...
Yeah, I'm looking at that comment now. You're right, June. And so it was a really cool opportunity, a really nice opportunity to not only talk about, you know, to pull in the academics, you know, pull in this really rigorous academic, but also with topics that are important to students. And especially, and I can't say especially, but for sure with English learners who we know are, and I'm looking at my chat box here, who we know, many of whom are coming from other places, other countries, and have come to us, and have escaped some kind of worse situation. Clearly, they're here in the United States for a better life. You know, no matter what kind of situation and scenario they were leaving. But we also know that a lot of them have either recently or not so recently left scenarios, situations that could have very well been traumatic. And as a result, you know, are dealing with mental health issues because of some of the trauma that they endured. Like I started off by saying, this is not a mental health awareness is not a topic that is, it should be dealt with in terms of stigma. It affects us all. Just by turning on the television every day and listening to what's happening around the world and listening to the news is stress-provoking. You know, we look at our young students that are coming to us more and more as underagers from traditional high schools, and it really gives you pause, because you have to ask, well, why did you leave the traditional high school in the first place? For many, many of our students who land with us in adult ed, they landed with us for a reason. They're leaving situations where something happened to them. And oftentimes something happened to them over and over again. So bringing up this topic of mental health awareness, really, we knew was one that affected just about all of our students, even if it wasn't them personally, someone that they knew. So we knew it was something important to talk about, but we wanted to capitalize on the opportunity and really layer in the rigorous academics as well. So these are additional sentence starters for our English learners that we knew they might need when discussing some of these rigorous topics. These are ways to get the conversation started, a way to scaffold them into the conversation, because more and more what we hear from our workforce that we feed at our technical colleges with regard to our English learners that transition into their places of employment, they tend to be really hard-working employees and wonderful, and their work ethic is very strong. Communication, effective communication, still tends to be one of the issues that they want us to continue to shore up and to better prepare our students, specifically our English learners. It's the communication that a lot of our employees or employers will tell us that our students need to be better prepared with. So it's important that we, again, it's not just about passing tests and hitting those scores, but really aiming high and setting them up for success for post-secondary and careers. And, we talked about not just reading and regurgitating. It's not just about reading and comprehending. With regard to mental health awareness, okay, now we've done some of the research, we talked about it, we plotted it out, we layered on the math, we layered in the science and the reading, we got engaged in the conversation. Now that next creative, critical thinking, 21st century level of thinking is, okay, well, what can we do about this? This is a problem that we have, right? These are problems that we see facing so many people around us, ourselves, our family members, our colleagues, our staff members. What can we do about this? How can we contribute to this situation to make it a little bit better? So we're talking about that creativity as one of the 4 C's. So one of the things that we did as another layer, and again, hats off to our ESOL department because this actually came out of our ESOL department, it was their idea, was, okay, now that we've built all of this learning around mental health awareness, one thing that we can do to continue the conversation, because sure, it's May, but this is a topic that is something we've got to talk about year round. One of the things that we can do is to promote the conversation, is to keep the conversation going, to remove that stigma, and to make sure that other people around us, folks around us, know that we're okay talking about this, and it's okay to not always feel okay. So our ESOL department came up with the idea, well, why don't we make t-shirts? Why don't we make t-shirts so that we can not only build awareness, but raise some money? We can raise some money. So we raised, we sent out we created the t-shirts. The ESOL department created the t-shirts, sent it out for the entire staff. We got great feedback from staff and students who purchased t-shirts, and then we were able to take all of the profits and donate to one of our local partners. So we donated to Broward 211, or 211 Broward, that does a lot of nonprofit work around mental health awareness. So it was a great opportunity. Actually, this Friday we will all be wearing our t-shirts and getting together for a photo opportunity. But it was a great feeling to be able to not only start the conversation, layer in the learning around it, and then feel like we did something that gave back and contributed to society. And as a matter of fact, a few weeks ago, there was what is called the World Happiness Summit in Miami, Florida. And for those of you who have visited Miami, it's not just a regular, you might say every weekend in Miami is the World Happiness Summit. This was actually a large-scale conference of experts from all over the world that came together to talk about positive psychology. And this is Dr. Tal here, who is a Harvard University professor who's since left Harvard and started his own institute called the Happiness Studies Institute, which actually is the most popular course at Harvard and Yale and Stanford and UPenn. So these are folks, experts, researchers, doctors, that have been studying this field for over a decade now, because we talk about the science of mental health and we talk about the science of mental illness, but what's the science behind happiness? So these are studies literally about what physiologically, mentally, spiritually, whole person can get folks, students, and these people are really invested, because if you look at some of the research that come out of the Ivy League schools, over 40% of students in the Ivy League schools report depression, report being depressed. So we know if over 40% of students report being depressed, they're far more than that. So they took on this task of trying to figure out, well, what's the science behind happiness? And like I said, in not too long, it was the most popular course at Harvard, at Yale, at Stanford, at UPenn. So Miami hosted the Happiness Conference, where, again, experts came together and shared information. And one of the professors, the dean actually, Dr. Isaac Prilatensky from University of Miami, did a session called Mattering. And his research shows that with regard to mattering, in other words, belonging, feeling like you belong, that, because we're talking about mental health and mental wellness, a lot of the students that we serve are dealing with issues of whether or not they feel like they belong. Did they belong where they came from? Do they belong here? Do they fit in? Are they valued, in other words? So Dr. Prilatensky's stance is that in terms of feeling valued and being valued and mattering, half of the equation is feeling that you are personally valued. But the other half of that equation is that feeling of adding value. So when our students did the project around mental health awareness and were able to come together and raise money to give back to the community, to give back to 211 Broward, there was this sense of, oh, I am adding value to the community because, of all of this research that I did, but it makes them feel like they matter more, they belong more, they are more valued because they've done something good. And I'm sure that probably doesn't surprise you because, lots of folks will say the best way to get happy or the best way to cure depression is by, paying it forward, by volunteering, by doing good things in the community, by, doing good things for other people. So we knew this was kind of like a win-win situation. Not only are we talking about mental health awareness and putting it out on the forefront so we can all talk about it minus the stigma, but also, layering on the learning, and then what can we do to make students feel like they've contributed to society as well. So it was really important. And, going forward, we'll talk a little bit more about positive psychology as the year progresses. But we felt pretty good about the work that we had done. And like I said, this Friday, we'll all gather and take pictures, photo opportunity of all of us in our mental health awareness T-shirts.
Jenna, you'll have to share that picture so we can put it up on the website.
You got it. And so these are some of the resources that I shared as we kind of close out here. They're part of the documents that have been uploaded. I'll be sure to June, I'll make sure that you get the lesson plan template too, so that we can add to the resources that we've uploaded into the website, because it's a nice way to keep us focused as we pull together these types of lessons. So I'm going to take a look at the Q&A box to see if there are any other questions that came through, or the chat.
Jenna, a comment that's coming through, which I think is really an important comment, is that what you described is really a great retention strategy. I mean, you're connecting with the students, so you're retaining them.
Yeah, June, I can't say enough about the fact that our students are getting younger and younger. They are coming to us as 16 and 17-year-olds more and more. And what we're finding with these young students, and it's not just them, but what we're finding with these students is it certainly wasn't because of academic reasons that they left the traditional high schools. They left mostly for social emotional reasons. And they want friends, they want friendships, they want connection, they want community, they want to feel like they have, someone there looking out for them. So when we opened up this conversation about mental health awareness, we weren't expecting the kind of feedback that we got, but they were certainly open to talking about it because we made it a safe conversation. And some of the feedback and some of the stories that we got back were just heart-wrenching, honestly, to be honest with you. But at least it started the conversation for them. So let's see. Okay, so I just have a question about accessing the PowerPoint, and yes, the PowerPoint and handouts will be are uploaded into the IPDAY website, and they are under the ESOL tab, so you can go into.
And they're already there, Jenna.
And they're already there under ESOL webinars, I believe.
Correct.
Feel free to go on and download any of the resources.
Let's look at this chat.
Awesome. Yes, thank you. And actually, one of my colleagues who I know is a huge proponent of Newsela, is saying that I might want to mention the fact that there's an annotation tool in Newsela. Yeah, Newsela keeps getting better and better with regard to the functions that they have and the tools that they have. And even if you don't have the paid subscription, there are a lot of things that you can do inside of the program, and they just keep building on in terms of critical thinking layers that they're asking of students. So it's not just a reading and comprehending. There's always a writing portion that students are offered. So it's really asking them to extend their thinking and not just read and regurgitate, so kind of the conversation that we were having about bumping the rigor up. Thank you for that. Okay, June, so if there aren't any more questions, I'll turn it back over to you so we can close out with feedback.
Thank you so much, Jenna. And I also want to thank the Florida Department of Education for, supporting this webinar. But before we close out today's webinar, we'd like to just take one more minute of your time to answer these 3 short questions that are on your screen. So let's just give it a minute and we'll answer the question, and then I'll come back and give you some closing comments. Okay, well, thank you. Your feedback is really important to us. So we'll close the poll now, and thank you again for joining us. We hope that you'll join us on our next webinar, which will be scheduled on June the 19th. It's titled, There's So Much More to Florida IP Day. We're going to take you on a virtual tour of the website, and we're going to highlight some new resources that we've been working on. So there's some lesson plans, e-learning modules, and just a lot of new things that we want to share with you. So again, thank you for your participation today. I hope you have a wonderful holiday weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, all.